This meeting is for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Matt T will be sharing on steps 2 and 3 for 60 minutes. This is Matt's fourth time speaking at the Broken Elevator, in addition to facilitating the Q&A for the Broken Elevator's second anniversary meeting in November of this year. Matt, thank you in advance for coming in to share your life with us today and for carrying such a brilliant message of Alcoholics Anonymous to the world. We love having you here with us at God's meeting, and we appreciate you. So at this time, please help me give a warm welcome to Matt from the Bronx, New York, where his home group is the Bronx Big Book Study. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, James. My name is Matt. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I was a little bit nervous, and then I noticed that St. Tony Z from the Bronx was here to listen. And once Tony's in the room, everything's going to be okay. I will say that I love the Broken Elevator. You guys have the greatest introductions in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. Also, having anything read at the beginning of a meeting in a British accent makes this feel like a royal event. And so it's fantastic. So thank you, James. Thank you, Tam, for asking me to speak. Thank you guys for welcoming me back. I didn't even realize it's been 4 times. That's amazing. This is a special group, right? I remember when you guys started, and it's been a beautiful thing to watch you guys grow and to be able to be a part of that. So kudos to you and for what you're doing for Alcoholics Anonymous. I appreciate you. It is not easy to put on a large scale meeting with quality sobriety consistently in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that the amount of service that goes on behind the scenes often goes unnoticed, unrecognized, and underappreciated. And so let me say thank you as someone who understands fully and appreciates it even more so. So as James said, my home group is the Bronx Big Book Study. It was a real meeting with beating hearts and stinky coffee before the days of Zoom. And it's blossomed into something that I could have never imagined on Zoom. So if you're ever available, check us out. I understand for you guys in the UK, it's late at night. But we do have a Sunday morning speaker meeting, which is Sunday afternoon speaker meeting for you guys. Right. So my home group is the Bronx Big Book Study. My sobriety date is May 19, 2016, which means that I've been sober for 2,357 days, if anybody's counting. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. I sponsor guys who sponsor guys. And I try to stay in the middle of that circle and triangle thing that you guys talk about all the time. And so I'm here to talk on steps 2 and 3. And I never plan for these things, right? I don't do notes. What I rely on is my relationship with God to guide me. And on my desk calendar that's underneath where you guys can't see, and I blurred the background because my sweaters and jackets are hanging out of my closet very messily, right? It says on this desk calendar, God, you're up. Right? And that's it. That's the prayer. God, you're up. Right? I hope that when I sit in front of a podium anywhere, right, that whatever violence God can choose is the violence to beat my ego down just enough so that it can stay something of value that is inspired by Him. Right? And in an effort to talk on steps 2 and 3, I think a good place to start is the tail end of step 1. Right? And the reason I say that is because in order for me to arrive at the conclusion that God could be a possible solution to this, I have to really understand the unmanageability of my life. Right. And I think oftentimes when we talk about the unmanageability of alcoholism, the first thing that comes to mind is the external things that we try to manage, right? With our hands, with our minds, with our manipulation, with our ego, those kinds of things, right? And so the first time the idea of an unmanageable life was presented to me, my response was, but I have a job and I have a car and I have an apartment and I'm a single dad. So there's no way that my life is unmanageable, right? My son goes to school every morning with a warm breakfast in his belly, with an ironed uniform, homework is done, looking clean, right? Like taken care of. So, and the question I received in response was, what about your inside? Right. And so, because so much of my life when I arrive at Alcoholics Anonymous is determined by what I can see, right? It's easy for me to see when I get here that when I start drinking, I can't stop. If I really look at how I drink at the bar versus the non-alcoholic, how I can watch them get up from the bar when their daughter has a soccer game or their wife is going to beat them up or traffic has let up and they can find their way out of the bar and into their car and off to their families. And I can see that, right? Or I can see that I spent the entire day telling myself that I wasn't going to drink, that I wasn't going to do it to myself again. That last night was a really bad night. And it was the third night in succession where I did that to myself. And I can't keep hurting my family. I can't keep hurting everybody else. And I can see that I find my way back into the bar. I can see that I find my way back to the liquor store. It's harder to see that I'm the common denominator in all my failed relationships. It's harder for me to see that on my best day, I fail at normal things, right? At things like patience, at things like understanding, at things like being a part of, right? I can't do normal adult things. I remember in early sobriety, I was dating a girl. Do not recommend. We are not together anymore. It didn't last longer than a couple of weeks. Do not recommend. However, she was living with a guy who was 7 months sober. 7 years sober, 7 years sober. And I hadn't told her, I told her I didn't drink. I hadn't told her why. I hadn't told her I was trying to get sober. But I just asked her, I said, well, how is it like living with a dude who's sober, who's in recovery? She's like, nah, for the most part, he's cool. But there's like normal everyday stuff that he like struggles with. And I was like, that's a pretty good description of how I am untreated. Now, I don't know if he was or not, but like without alcohol as a solution and without God as a solution, I'm going to struggle to do everyday tasks, which means like I'm going to struggle to be a worker among workers in my job. I'm going to struggle to not procrastinate. I'm going to struggle to not like be the best loving and caring father that I can be. I'm going to struggle to like what I see when I look in the mirror. And that's just my baseline. My baseline is chronically dissatisfied with life. My baseline is in constant disagreement with whatever my reality presents to be. Right? And the argument constantly when we talk about that is like, well, was I born like that? Did I become like that? Is it nature? Is it nurture? It doesn't really matter. Right? I've learned that it doesn't really matter because by the time I get here, I have to deal with the facts that I have about myself and then take whatever necessary action I can take so that I can recover. Right? What's funny is that like when you look at that diagram that the circle and the triangle that I talk about, that I was talking about, that I alluded to in the beginning, right? It talks about the different sides of the triangle when we describe it, and it talks about the 12 spiritual principles right? And so the bottom of it is recovery, right? And that's supposed to treat my mind and my thinking and my perceptions on life. And the principles that do that are the 12 steps, right? And if it's an exercise in changing my thinking, but the solution to my thinking problem is a spiritual one. And the only way that I'm going to even entertain the idea of a spiritual solution to the way that I think, the way that I show up in life, is if I'm convinced that the way that I'm living life is unsustainable, that I will not be fulfilled, that I'm going to continue to hurt people even when I don't want to. Right? And so what does like the unmanageability of my insides look like? What does the unmanageability of my spirit looks like? There's a really good description of how it presents on page 52 of the big book. It's called the bedevilment. But that is not the spiritual malady itself. Right? That's just how it looks in real time. So as I take guys through the book and we're starting to come through, it's like, well, if that's your reality, if that's the best that you can do on your own power, on your best day, then what's really your problem? It's obviously not drinking. Right? Because if drinking was my problem, the solution to my problem is just stop drinking. My problem is really that I have this disconnection from God, which makes me completely incapable of connecting with you, which leaves me running around in circles chasing my tail because all I can worry about is myself, how you can serve me, what role I can play in your life. And when things don't go my way, I climb into a hot tub of self-pity and I just wallow in it. And that becomes the cycle that I live in. And what happens is that that's how I'm going to live my life without a drink until the drink seems like the only good idea to treat that state of living. Right. And so this is how it looked for me. Right. I walk into a meeting, and the first meeting I go to, and I say, "Hi, my name is Matt." I don't say I'm an alcoholic. I haven't the slightest idea what it means to be an alcoholic. And I say, "Hey, my girlfriend at the time is the problem." And I wait for the applause and the cheers. And so then I go on to recruit her to our sobriety. I'm like, we're going to get sober together. Mind you, she's not an alcoholic, never exhibited any of the traits of an alcoholic. I say, we're going to get sober together for our son. And I said it with my chest out. And nobody clapped. Nobody applauded. And some salty long timer from the back of the meeting shouts out of his mouth, "Keep coming back, kid." And I thought that it was the most condescending thing I'd ever heard in my life. And so I stormed out of the meeting. Because here's the thing, right? In my mind, in my fragile mind, I thought somebody brought to my attention that I might have a drinking problem, somebody whose opinion I value. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the right thing, and I'm going to go to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I'm going to tell them that I know what's wrong with me, and it's her, and that I know what the solution is that we fix this problem together for our child. I didn't ask for help. I didn't ask for a phone number. I didn't ask what you guys do here. Right? I was having trouble in personal relationships. My emotional nature was out of control. I was having trouble making a living, which means I didn't have a problem keeping a job because I had a union job. It's really hard to get fired from, but I didn't feel fulfilled there. And I was always having trouble there. Right? So all of these things were a part of my life. And when it came to presenting a solution for them, I didn't realize that I was hopeless. So what did I do? I left there and I drank. And I came back and I did that over and over again. And I kept drinking over and over again. There was a point that when I'd heard enough from you guys that God was the solution to the problem, that I said to myself, I'm just going to cut out the middleman. I grew up in the church. I'm going to go straight to the church. I don't need Alcoholics Anonymous. I know where God hangs out. And I went to the church. And I would even go as far as going up to the altar and getting an anointing with oil for my drinking problem, and have the pastor pray over me. And then I would sit down and I would get jazzed up by the gospel music, and I would get fired up by the sermon, and I would leave the church and I would go drink. I would take my 3-year-old, 4-year-old son with me to the kids part of the church, pick him up from the church, and on the way home, take him home and stop at the liquor store on the way home, thinking to myself that if my son was with me, that was going to be enough to stop me from stopping at the liquor store. It was enough to stop me from going to the bar, but never enough to stop me from going to the liquor store. You see, the thing is that it wasn't that I was drinking too much or that I couldn't stop drinking. I didn't have access to power. I didn't have access to power. I didn't understand the depths of what was really wrong with me. And so I can't apply the solution if I don't know the problem. I can know where God is anywhere I want, right? God can live anywhere. What we're going to come to find later in my talk, and surprise, surprise, it's in the big book. If you ever look inside there, God's inside of us, right? And so I can look for God all I want, but if I don't know where to apply this relationship, if I don't know where I'm falling short, if I don't know what I need, I don't know what to ask for, and I don't know where to look. And so I kept doing that over and over and over again, until finally I come in here and I find out what's really wrong with me. And so the thing is, like, as we go through We Agnostics, in the beginning of We Agnostics is where he kind of drives home this spiritual unmanageability thing, and he starts to make the case for faith, right? Because we don't need faith to begin here, right? And that's the thing. And I think that that's what gets so scary for a lot of people when we come here and they start hearing us talk about God, and we're praying in the meetings, and if they've had some weird relationship with God or the church or the faith of their parents or their upbringing or whatever it is, like, it can be a little unnerving for certain people. But once I have this step one truth, this step one experience that really comes home to me, it doesn't require that I develop this overnight faith, right? This coming to believe is a process, and it's not a process of just magically arriving at the conclusion that God can restore me to sanity. I have to understand, like I like to say, we have to kind of Tarantino our way backwards through the second step, right? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, first I have to understand how insane I really am, right? The insane part of my alcoholism is that stone cold sober, I put a drink in my face, understanding the ramifications of what that decision is going to be. The other insanity of alcoholism is looking at the bedevilment, seeing that that's my truth, understanding that I'm failing in all of my relationships and all of my responsibilities in life, and thinking that there's something that I can do on my own power to remedy that situation. Right? I became a fireman with the New York City Fire Department. I spent my entire life trying to figure out what it meant to be a man. Right? My dad was murdered when I was young. I was raised in a coven with 9 women. They hate when I say that, but I say it anyway. Right? Like this was what it was. My entire life was me searching for what it meant to be a man. And on some level in my brain at 29 years old, when I arrived at the firehouse, I thought, like, I'm going to be locked in this place with 10 other guys for 24 hours at a clip. Like, this will make a man out of me. And guess what? I was dishonest. I was incapable of showing up. I didn't understand the concept of brotherhood. I had no integrity. Right? And so what happens is that we all wear masks, right? An effort through the steps is to get rid of the masks, right? So that the I and the me are the exact same person, right? So that the person that walks into the coffee shop and the person that walks into the job, and the person that climbs into bed with their spouse, and the person that's playing on the floor with their children are all the same person. But for me, there were 20 different ones, because I chameleoned myself into whatever group I was in, just so I could fit in, just so you could accept me. And guess what happens when you're locked in a room, in a building with guys for 24 hours at a clip? You run out of gas in your mask. You can't BS them for that long. And all of it started to break through, and guys started to see the real me, and to see how full of it I really was, and how I was incapable of showing up when they needed me to show up, and how many times I would try to manipulate things in my favor. There's a term for it in the fire department. They call it a square rooter, the guy who tries to figure out all the angles. And I was very quickly labeled a square rooter. And so many times I would have these pep talks with myself, and I would say, like, man, like, you got to do better, right? Like, you've made it. Like, when I walked across that stage and the mayor of New York City handed me my diploma from graduating from the fire academy, it was my I had arrived moment. Like, dude, you got to do better. And I couldn't. I never once saw a pretty girl in my life and said, man, I can't wait to break her heart. But I did. It was the best that I could do. Right. And so this is how I'm showing up on my best day. But I don't understand all of that. I don't understand that this is the unmanageability of my life. And so what do? I drink. And so how do I make the case for faith? Right at the end of the chapter, when he rolls out onto his knees and he says, who am I to say there is no God? You scribble past it onto the last page. And what does it say? It says, circumstances made him willing to believe. And so it is by default, by having like a sound and deep step one experience, that then I arrive at the decision that I make in step 2. And we don't often think of step 2 as a decision, right? The wording doesn't really say anything about a decision. But I have to start there with this addition by subtraction, right? The first thing that I have to do is realize that everything that I've ever tried on my own power didn't work. Right? I tried reading all of the philosophical books under the sun, the Tao, right? I read Siddhartha, right? I read all of these essays by Aristotle, right? Anything that you could find that was meant like to be on higher thinking, right? I was sitting on the train drinking, reading Don Miguel Ruiz, like, it didn't matter. Like, everything that I tried failed. I tried CrossFit. I love telling this story, right? I tried CrossFit, and I thought like CrossFit was going to save me from drinking, right? And I'm a joiner. I went and got the junk headbands and the high tie-dye socks and the Reebok Nanos in 7 different colors, right? And I show up, and all of these guys are talking about how they don't eat carbs, right? They just eat like nuts and seeds and fruits and veggies and tons of protein. And they call it the paleo diet. And I'm a joiner, so I go and buy a cookbook for the paleo diet. And on the first page of the cookbook, it lists the absolute knots. And the first one is, it says, in the paleo diet, no alcohol. And I'm like, yes, I found the solution to my problem. And I come home and I tell my girlfriend, I said, you're going to love this one. I just joined this CrossFit gym and I love this place. And I'm eating what they're eating. And I bought their cookbook and their cookbook says no booze. And she's like, you think that that's going to stop you from drinking? You think that you're going to lift enough weight that it's going to keep you away from the booze? She like laughed, dismissed it, and just kept on about her day. And I genuinely believed that there was something that I could manufacture on my own power that was going to keep me from drinking. And so how do I arrive? Right. So if I understand that that's the best that I can do, that everything that I've tried has failed, then I have to remove Matt as a possible solution to the problem. And that's a really good place to start. Right? Because what that looks like in our wording is a willingness. Right? It's just a willingness. Because if my diagnosis is that I'm selfish and self-centered, driven by 100 forms of fear, mostly self-centered fear, right? All of these delusions of self, this self-pity, all of this stuff. So if I take self out of the equation for 1 second, I allow space for the possibility that there's something greater than me. Right? And we talk about this all the time when you hear meetings, people say like group of drunks and the great outdoors and all this other stuff, right? Like what? It's God. It's God. Right? But I don't want to rob you of the experiential journey that you can have with God. Because my first time arriving at step 2, I told my sponsor, I said, I know you're talking about God when you say higher power, let's just keep going. And I drank. Right? Because my willingness to believe has to be on such solid foundation that it allows for me to stand up strong and cultivate a relationship with God that I can feel. And that means that I need to see God in action. I need to see faith working. And in the very beginning, the only faith that I can see working is that I walk into that meeting in that dingy basement on Bailey Avenue, and Tony's there every week screaming about how cool the big book is. Now, the basement looks like the scariest place on the planet, and Tony's really excited to be there every week. Right? And when I hear somebody like Tony's story, and then the person standing in front of me doesn't look anything like the person whose story he's telling, there might be some truth to what you're talking about. Maybe this God thing that you guys are talking about might hold some weight. And this is why, from this place, from this podium, a drunkalog serves no purpose. I drank enough. But when I grab a guy and I go into the coffee shop, or we're sitting in my car, or I take him home, I got to tell him what I did. Right? Because he might see the firefighter, yoga instructor, bodybuilding competitor, dad of 2, guy trying to live in his life, living his best life, doing his thing. He might not think that guy drank like me, but I need to tell him I did. And I need to show him how I don't anymore. Right? And so we've established the insanity. We've established that maybe there might be a power greater than me. That's what you guys are showing me. So how do I come to believe? How do I take that mustard seed of willingness and sprout some belief out of it? It's by action. Everything that I'm promised in this program, whether it's a definitive promise that you big book nuts can quote verse and page and verse. I'm one of those big book nuts, so please don't take any offense to that. Or if it's something came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. Well, the promise is that if I arrive at that step and I follow through on what it says, then I will arrive at the conclusion that God can solve my problem. Right? And so what's the argument for faith? What's the argument that's going to turn my willingness into belief and that belief eventually into faith? Have we ever worshiped anything? Have we ever had faith in anything? Right? He gives the silly explanation of electricity, right? I walk into a door, I flick the switch, I have full faith the thing is going to turn on. Anybody ever tell themselves that if their bank account read a certain number, they were going to be okay? When the bank account read that number, were you okay? Or did you just want a bigger number? Did anybody ever tell you if the guy or the girl said yes and let you take them on a date that everything would be okay? Or if the ex-boyfriend or girlfriend just got their stuff together, then we would just be okay. Or if my son would just do better in school, I'll be okay. Or if the guys at work would just get off my back, I'll be okay. Or if I could just drive that luxury car, I'll be okay. Or if I could just close in this house, I'll be okay. You get the point. I had faith that all of these external things would define my insides, that they would fulfill me and they would bring me happiness. And what happened was I was trying to stick the triangle peg in the circle hole and it just didn't fit. And so I have to believe that there's something more, there's something different, there's something here that has a plan for me that my feeble, powerless mind can't access just yet. I have to make a decision for God. I have to make a decision for God before I get to step 3. Because the decision is this. If the bedevilments are my truth on my best day, and there is no God, or God is nothing, how is that going to fare for me? Now, if the bedevilments are my truth, and God is or God is everything, how will I fare then? Well, I don't really know, but I know how option A plays out. And I do know that there are 94 other people in this meeting that are telling me that the God idea works. And we've already established that my ideas, my best thinking on my best day, got me dragging my feet into an AA meeting saying, please help me put my life back together. So I'm willing to gamble, right? Pascal's wager. I'm willing to gamble just slightly on the idea of God and to believe that there might be something here in this process that you guys are presenting, right? I sat in a meeting after spending a day, right? When the fire department is very nice. We have our own in-house treatment deal, and they sent me off to an inpatient, and when we come back, they send you to your outpatient for 6 weeks before they release you back to the wild. And we're sitting in there and we're having this guy named Chris D from Rockaway. If you can get him here to speak, he's fantastic. And we're sitting and we're going over the intricacies of this step 1 truth. And it's really like he's really hammering it home for me. Now, in the first few months of my sobriety, I would go to this outpatient deal. I'd come home, I'd pick my son up from school, I'd take him I'd give him dinner, right? I'd get his stuff ready for the next day. I'd read him a bedtime story, put him in bed, and then I'd pick him up and I'd take him upstairs to my mom's apartment because she lived upstairs, and I'd go to a 10 p.m. meeting on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Now I'm sitting in that meeting, and just to paint for you what's going on here, right? I'm sitting in this meeting and I'm trying to intellectually understand this step 1 deal. And there's a guy from the Atlanta group who's speaking. And if you don't know the Atlanta group, if there's anybody in the Atlanta group, no offense, I love you guys. But he's sitting up there, he looks super proper. He's got his shirt and his tie and his blazer on because they can't speak without any of that. And I apologize for any Canadians in the room because I'm not wearing a tie. However, and then in the front row of that meeting is a dude who looks like he could be an extra on a South Central gang movie, right? Like he's bald-headed, he's like steaming with anger, and he's got like a phoenix tattoo coming up the side of his neck, and he keeps flirting with putting his hand up. And me, in my judgmental mind, right, prejudices, old ideas, I'm thinking like, what's this guy gonna say? And he's the last guy to share, and he raises his hand and he tells a little bit about what's going on, and he says, you know, when I was out there trying to kill myself, God brought me here. He says, so now that I'm here, why would I question for a second if God's going to see me through? And in that moment, it was, I've been trying to figure out God. I've been trying to understand God. I've been trying to bring the God of my parents and the God of my upbringing and all of that other stuff into this situation. And all it did was create roadblocks. I couldn't put aside my experiences that I had with God, or as my therapist likes to say, I couldn't put that on the shelf for the moment. What I had to do was put aside everything I ever thought, knew, or felt about God and explore God on a level that was going to be the result of my actions here. And so if I understand that I don't have power, that on my own power I fail constantly, then I need access to a power that's greater than me. That power has to be God, because that's what you guys are telling me. Right? And that moves me to step 3. Right? So I make this decision for God in step 2. God is everything or else he is nothing. What was our choice to be? Right? I arrived at step 3 and I realized what's wrong with me. Right? In the beginning of how it works, in that very first paragraph, it talks about my need to be honest with myself 3 times. And why is that so important? Well, it talks about God is inside me, right? Deep down, every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. This is where he is. And every religion under the sun, they have some word or some term or some phrase which describes exactly that. And they tell me to be quick to see where religious people are at. Right? And so if this God thing is inside of me, and it's been inside of me all along, and I've been looking for it in the girlfriend, in the bottle, right, in the drinking accessory, in the car, in the bank account, in the house, in the achievement, in the badge, in the this and the that. Well, why can't I still access it? Well, it's because it's stuff with me, right? Like, I have to be honest with me about me. I'm a drunk who can't get his life together. And I am riddled with selfishness, self-centeredness, self-centered fear, self-pity, delusions. I live in this place. This is much deeper than just the bedevilments. This is my reality, and I haven't the slightest idea. When I got here, this was news to me. Right? This was all news to me. It rang completely true when I first heard it, but I didn't know that was wrong. What was wrong with me? I didn't understand the idea of the actor. Right? So I get to the 3 pertinent ideas. And a lot of times when I start step work with guys, before we even start at the beginning of the book, I ask them those 3 questions. Right? A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, drunk or sober. Check. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Check. Right? And I say this all the time, and it's controversial opinion, but religion is a human power. The steps might bring me back to a new religion or the religion of my upbringing. Right? But I need to go deep into my problem before I see God. Right? And see that that God couldn't would if he were sought. Right? And originally they say, if you're not convinced at this point, chuck this thing out the window, reread it up to this point, or chuck this thing out the window. I'm paraphrasing. Right? But why? Because if I don't understand that I can't do it and maybe God can, whatever I'm going to read from that point on doesn't really matter. It's not going to register. It's not going to sink in. Right? And the first thing that I have to be convinced of is that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. My will, my power, my thinking got me here. My will, my power, my thinking got me here. Nobody comes to Alcoholics Anonymous riding the wings of victory. Nobody stumbles in here backwards and says, that coffee smells fantastic. Okay, take a couple Oreos and I'll stay. Right? And the thing is that, like, I am trying to impose my will, my thinking, my ideas, and my perceptions, not only on myself, but on the people around. And it changes the way that I behave. It changes who I am on a really fundamental level, right? Because if I want Rachel to do something for me, and Rachel is sweet and bubbly and nice, then I'm going to be sweet and bubbly and nice. And after a few attempts at sweet and bubbly and nice, I'm going to be mean and nasty and a little more forceful, and I'm going to be a little rude and a little disrespectful until I get what I need, right? And if I understand that James is a little rougher and he likes when I talk spicy, then I'm going to talk spicy to James. Right? I'm going to change who I am to get what I need. It doesn't matter. But the delusion that I live in, right, is this idea is that I can manipulate things in my favor, right? The book says that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of life if only I manage well. So what happens is that I write Libby a script. I say that Libby serves this role in my life. right? And then she doesn't know I wrote the script for her. So when she doesn't read the lines, I then become resentful. I write myself a role into Deb's life, and I say, this is how I'm going to show up. I'm this person to Deb. And when she doesn't allow me to do that because she didn't know I wrote that role in her life, she's upset and I'm upset, and I can't understand why she's so pissed off at me. And this is how I live my life. Right? This is how I live my life. Every time that I read in the step 3, the actor, director thing, has anybody ever seen the movie Along Came Polly? Right? When Philip Seymour Hoffman is on the stage, right, and he's got like a bit part in the play, and he just comes running out and he blasts open and he starts doing Jesus' part, and he starts pointing where the light should go, and I think it should go this way, and he starts singing a song that's not even in the play, right? That's how my life is. If you haven't seen that movie, go watch it because it describes us really well in that one scene. Right? This is how I live my life. And I'm not even aware that I'm doing that, right? This is why it says later that we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate seemingly without provocation, right? Most of the time, I don't even know that I'm hurting you, right? I get into a relationship and I convince myself that this relationship she's the one, that I'm going to get married and we're going to have kids, right? And we're going to live the American dream, which is the white picket fence and a minivan and 2.5 kids and a golden retriever. And I can't wait to take these imaginary kids in my head to soccer practice. Right? And the minute I come up on any resistance of that, all of a sudden the blonde down the street starts to look really pretty. Why? I don't have the tools to think that I might have to do some work here to make this relationship work. I am not with the awareness that the entire world revolves around me. And God forbid, I might have to do something selfless for a second. I might have to do some work on me. I don't have that. I haven't the slightest idea that this is going on. Right? Why is not really the question I should be asking. But when the book says, so we think these troubles are of our own making, right? Like, why are they? Why did I make all this trouble for myself? I don't know. Right? I could tell the story that, about my dad being murdered and being raised alone in a house with a 14-year-old sister, right? With all the girls in the apartment next door, popping in, popping out, sex, drugs, loud music, all this other stuff, living in my home when my mom was working 2 jobs to make sure that, the lights stayed on and food stayed in our bellies, right? Or me running through the streets trying to figure out what it meant to be a man. And no matter what private school my mom sent me to or a posh camp in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, I still found my way into the streets with guns and drugs and covered in tattoos for no real reason at all. Right? Like, I can give you that story, and maybe that's true. But I'll tell you that long before all of that, I had the isms. That long before that, I didn't feel like I fit in. I can tell you that long before that, I had ideas about how things should be done and run. And I always thought that my ideas were better than yours. I always thought that if I was in a relationship with you, that was quite the gift I was offering you. Right? Like, this was how my thinking was. And so if I'm operating in life this way, how am I going to come to the conclusion that like I'm selfish? Like, I hang out with you. I'm giving you my time. I'm self-centered. I think about me. Well, what else is there to think about? Right? Like, this is how self-absorbed I am. And so when you start to tell me these things about myself and I realize, like, holy cow, these are why my relationships are failing. These are why the guys behind my back at work are whispering about me and saying that I'm failing at this job. This is why they told me I'm the worst drunk here and I gotta leave. This is why people don't trust me. This is why people feel like they can't rely on me. This is why I drive myself crazy in traffic, because I think that the guys in front of me who are driving 10 miles per hour like I am are ruining the road just to ruin my day. I make everything about being. When we go further, we realize that like resentments in Alcoholics Anonymous are a thing because I make everything about me, right? And so what's the remedy for that? What's the solution for that? Well, I need to tell myself that that's what managing my own life looks like. That's what me thinking I have it all figured out looks like. And that's the kind of life that is going to put a drink in my face. Because I can't keep hurting people. I can't keep hurting myself. I can't keep failing the people that depend on me. I can't keep falling short of my responsibilities. I can't keep telling people I'm sorry. Right? I can't keep making excuses for myself. Not when I've been provided with the solution. Not when I've been banded around by this group of people who say, like, we're going to love you until you learn to love yourself. Not when I have these people telling me, like, Matt, there's something we can do about that. You don't need to drink anymore. Not only do you not need to drink anymore, you never have to feel like this again. I exhale for 1 second and they say to me, like, you got to get out of this management business, dude. Right? And like when Chris took me through the steps, we went through that paragraph where it says, God's going to be my director. And he asked me each question individually. He said, Matt, God's going to be your director. Are you all right with God being your director? He said, God's going to be your principal. Are you okay with God being your principal? God's going to be your father. You okay with God being your father? And every single concession I made, every single agreement I made, every time I said that, it was like one more brick was taken out of this book bag I didn't know I was carrying. I no longer needed to be the smartest guy. I no longer needed to have it all figured out. I no longer needed to worry if I was going to be the dad my son needed to be. I no longer needed to worry if I was going to be able to get sober. I no longer needed to worry about so many things. Like, this is not my deal anymore. This becomes God's deal. And there is such a freedom in that, right? There is such a freedom. Like, this program is not about what I'm going to pick up. This program is not about what I'm going to learn. This program is about this systematic letting go. I'm letting go of the idea that I can manage my life. I'm letting go of all of my old ideas that stand in the way of me having a relationship with God. And I'm letting go of the idea that I can run the show, that I have any say in how you should run your life. And I have even less say in how I should run mine. And what's funny is that they tell me all of that. They bring all of that to the forefront. And then they tell me what the promises are, right? And that's the one I thought I wasn't going to whip out my big book, but I'm going to whip out my big book. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employee. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully. As we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. Right? Like, we read the 9-step promises a lot. Look at all that juicy stuff we get. And we haven't even written an ounce of inventory yet. Right? And it's like, now, everything, I said this earlier, everything that I do in this program, every promise that I receive is contingent upon some action on my part. And where's the if here, right? He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Which means that my third step becomes a reality when I take action in step 4. Right? Right now, it's just a decision. Right now, it's just a realization that God is going to run the deal. but I actually let God run the deal when I put pen to paper. Right? We've all heard I love corny AA jokes. I do. Right? And the 3 frogs on a log, and 1 frog makes a decision to jump in the lake. How many frogs are left on the log? 3 frogs, because all he did was make a decision. Right? And so that's if I want this stuff, because this is profound. Because remember on the previous page, selfishness, self-centered, that we think is the root of our troubles. And we talk about the fear and how much we hurt people, right? And how all of this other stuff. And then it says, we became interested in seeing what we can contribute to life. That means not me, right? And the ultimate goal in this deal and the entire trip through the steps is less Matt, more God. Less Matt, more God, right? We enjoyed peace of mind. I'll tell you something that I did not realize how noisy my mind was until it quieted down. Right? Peace of mind, serenity, the ability to be comfortable being still is one of the greatest gifts of this program. Far better than any cash and prizes you could ever get. I promise you that. Right? As we became conscious of his presence. Right? Because when I make those concessions about God being the principal and the director and being my father, right, all of the pressure is off. You see, and the question that I asked you before was, like, how does my willingness go from belief and from belief to faith? And it happens right there. Because I'm not entirely sure what the next step is going to look like. I don't know what my inventory is going to reveal. I don't know how I'm going to feel after I say that prayer. But I'm going to do it because I want to be sober. I'm going to do it because I want to be usefully whole. I'm going to do it because, damn, Tony's really excited about this thing and I want what Tony has. Right? And you can't help but feel that. Right? Bill in his story talks about when he has his experience. He says, God comes to most men gradually, but to me, his effect was electric. Right? Right? And the thing is, right, he says the proposals, while drastic, right, and I'm paraphrasing, right? He says, when fully accepted, the effect was electric. Right. And I understand that we talk about some people get God quickly and some people get God slowly, and we get the educational variety, and some people get zapped with lightning or they have their burning bush. Whatever your experience is, God bless you. But I will tell you, when this stuff sinks in, right, when you take those terms literally, when I fully accept the God idea into my heart and I start really moving on this train through the steps, there is no other way to feel other than electric. It's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be comfortable. It's not always going to be pretty, but it's always going to be free. And I came here for freedom. Freedom from the drink. And then I came here again and again. And I arrive at these steps again and again for freedom from self. I'll tell you, the bondage of self is far more uncomfortable than a drink ever made me. And that's what I want freedom from. And when I ask in the 3rd step prayer for freedom from the bondage of self, I'm not asking it so I can put my toes up and get comfy. I'm asking it so I'm being wiped clean and ready for a life of service. I want to walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and be a testament to what God can do. I want to walk into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous and somebody say, what did that guy get? Not because I'm fiery and powerful or any of that, but because I'm patient and kind and I'm serene and I'm compassionate. The virtues that were constantly out of my grasp before I got this thing. That's the life I want. Right? That's the life I want. And it starts here. And the thing is that I do step 3 one time, I can come back through the steps as many times as I want. I can review them. I can actively do 4 through 9 as many times as I want. But I do step 3 one time. It is the covenant that I make with God. Guess what? Surprise, surprise. Throughout the course of your sobriety, at some point or another, you're going to fool yourself into thinking that you can play God somewhere in your life. And that's what we have steps 10 and 11 for. And if it gets really heavy, then we write a 4. And my last trip through the steps, my sponsor asked me to read Bill's trip through the steps in the hospital and just pick out anything that jumped out at me that didn't like really appear as it did before. And it was in his description of his step 3 experience. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. Right? And it was that one word, unreservedly. Because my goal is, as I move through my sobriety, is I have to start identifying what those reservations are. Am I coming to this thing and am I saying, God, like, you can have my program, but I'm going to handle my relationship. God, I trust you with my business, but I'm going to handle the finances. Or am I making it a point to bring God into every area of my life? Am I without reservation that if I want a God that's going to solve all my problems, as the book promises me, am I giving God all my problems? Or am I trying to manage parts of my life? I'm guilty of trying to manage parts of my life. Thank God I have sober people around me. Thank God I have sponsorship. Thank God I have prayer, meditation, and inventory. Because it's going to happen. It's an effort towards perfection, a perfection that I'm never going to attain. But in the effort towards perfection, what I am going to gain is a deeper connection and a deeper relationship with God. What I'm going to get is more awareness of my ego. My ego doesn't disappear. It just stops fooling me so much. And I get an awareness of that. And I'm given a moment of pause and I get to act differently. I get to show up differently. I'm presented with forks in the road constantly. And the fork in the road is always going to say one of two things, God or not God, period. And it just becomes so much easier to go down the road that God sets for me. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to speak at your meeting this afternoon.